Welcome to Hot Flashes and Cool Topics, a podcast for women in midlife and beyond. My name is Colleen.
My name is Bridget.
And today we listen to the audience. We are really, really excited. You know, we try to say to our listeners, if you have a topic you want to talk about, please let us know. We are happy to find an expert if we're not, because we don't claim to be experts on everything or much.
Or anything.
Yeah. Much.
Yeah.
But one of the most asked topics is weight gain. Midlife weight gain. I don't recognize my body. I'm doing the same things that I used to do. What's happening? Like, what has changed? So we were very lucky to connect with Val Schonberg, who is a registered licensed dietitian. I want to make sure I get this right. Registered licensed dietitian, a board certified specialist in sports dietetics. NAM certified menopause practitioner, which was like red flag for us because honestly, most of the questions that we hear about is how are my hormones playing a role in my weight gain and why can't I lose it? So welcome, Val.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and have an opportunity to see you instead of just talking. I've done these before where you don't get to really see everybody. So excited to see the questions and have the conversation.
Well, we are grateful that you took the time to sit here and chat with us because a lot of people just are so frustrated. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how many times I hear these questions from women. Why all of a sudden is my middle getting bigger? Like and there are actual reasons for it, but your doctors don't tell you, your friends don't want to talk about it. And I think, I read an article that you had written and you talk about it being the perfect storm. And it truly is in midlife because you have lifestyle changes. You may be going through marital issues, empty nesting, you may be traveling more. And so there's a lot of things that come into play here, but you see a lot of women in midlife, correct?
Yes.
And is this one of the main issues? They walk in and say, I am gaining weight and I don't know what to do.
Yes. And you, as a dietitian, that's often where I think we're a little bit of a gatekeeper or kind of on the front line. So women may be struggling with a lot of other issues related to menopause symptomology. But it's the weight gain that's like the tipping point of, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. My body's out of control. And so I'll just find a dietitian or a nutritionist to give me the next best diet or foods to eat, and everything will be fine and dandy and better. And so that's certainly, where we meet and where I meet them at. But often there's other stuff going on, right, related to lifestyle changes. And I think that's one of the perspectives that's maybe unique about what I bring to the work I do is that I'm putting it out there. I'm a 55-year-old going through this right along with my clients. And that's actually kind of how it started for me to even why would a dietitian get involved in menopause? But it was hearing my clients come to me with their questions, and I felt like I didn't have very good answers. So I kept learning and digging and researching, and here we are.
I was like, just what I liked though about what you said in your article.
We hear that a lot, that women go to doctors.
Is it slowing down? Or did you not hear me? I don't know what's going on.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't think
a little bit.
I was talking. Who broke?
No, go ahead,
Colleen. Okay, I was talking and you started talking, so I didn't know what happened. What I really liked about your article, I read your article, and what I liked first of all was how you talked about how the dietitians need to really be sympathetic with what's going on with women in this age, because that is probably a big fear. That is one with me. I'm almost afraid of being admonished by going in and being yelled at or being, just like these weigh-ins and terrifying me. And you also mentioned just being just tethered to calorie counting or food diaries and things like that. And can you talk a little bit more about what you've learned about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because again, my background was that I started working in nutrition in eating disorders and in eating disorder treatment. And I worked with all types of eating disorders across all ages and different levels of care. And so one of the areas that I specialized in when I worked in an eating disorder treatment program was compulsive overeating and binge eating disorder. And I would get we would see a lot of individuals. It'd be quite common that some of these individuals would be put on diets as early as 12 or 13 years old. And since then have even heard younger ages that, individuals are, kind of well-meaning parents trying to help them out, but taking them into, Weight Watchers or whatever it is. And so then that stepping on the scale and the judgment and the shame of, being able to eat right and get to a certain body size starts at such a young age. And even if it started later for somebody, I've heard hundreds of these stories. So that has a huge impact on me in terms of I would never want to do anything or say anything that would trigger disordered eating for someone, and certainly not an eating disorder. And so a little bit of diet culture in the diet industry, unfortunately, has set up individuals for that pattern. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm not super fond of calorie counting, but also it's not really very reliable. I mean, it's one of those things kind of like BMI that was invented a gazillion years ago based on, different science. And we know more now. Like we know that a calorie in doesn't equal a calorie out. And it's much more dynamic and complex in the body than this simple equation that people think of. And so for a lot of reasons, I really try to help steer people or meet them where they're at, but then guide them more to something that's really focused on what you can control, what are healthy behaviors, what are things with food and eating, and especially at this age in midlife, heading into, it's sad to say, but the diseases of aging that are real, we can really change our mindset about our relationship with food and our body for that matter. So that's a little bit of a long story as to why I'm pretty sensitive to not just putting people on a scale or having people do a bunch of food journaling, but people expect that. They come in like, I got my Fitness Pal and I'm ready to go. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, let's ask the $1 million question, which is the midlife middle. Why does it seem that as we pass 40, 45, we start to get perimenopausal, we start to gain weight in our middle?
Yes. So, what the research will show us is that on average, women gain about 5 pounds when they go through the menopause transition. But when they've controlled for the different stages of menopause, so premenopause is that time, which is really your reproductive age. Perimenopause is about anywhere on average 4 years to up to 10 years prior to the final menstrual period. And when we think about that transition, it seems like lifestyle seems to be more related in the research to this weight gain rather than menopause itself or the changing hormones itself. So, I think they continue to research that and debate that. However, it does seem that declining estrogen, specifically, for reasons that I still haven't really found a good answer for, just causes the body to shift and store more of that fat. So if you're going to gain weight, you're more likely to gain it in your middle than you would have in your hips or hip area. And so for a woman who might have been, say, that apple shape to begin with, right, where she was already maybe genetically predispositioned to storing fat in her middle section, she might see a greater increase in that. And for the woman who maybe was experiencing something more of like a pear shape where she would store fat in her hips, which is really important for childbearing, and that's why that happens. We don't need to be reproductive anymore. We don't need to have kids anymore. And so that fat, for some of those reasons, shift to that middle. I'm always kind of trying to get to the next layer, which is mechanistically, why does that happen? Is it because it becomes a little bit more similar to what we see in, say, males, right? In terms of how males are more likely to store fat, happens to be in their middle. So there's some theories around, what happens with testosterone or a lot of other things. But in general, it's really the effect of declining estrogen that causes that redistribution of body fat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also in your article, I just, a lot of things in your article really resonated with me.
Oh, good.
And I noticed I wasn't as active. When I was going through that, my kids were out of the house. And I love to exercise. I still would exercise every day, but I probably throughout the day wasn't moving as much. And when I saw that and thought, I didn't even think about that I wasn't as active as I used to be. So that was another part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, kind of back to what Colleen had pointed out, that I've used this analogy before, which is a perfect storm. And when I'm talking about a perfect storm in terms of menopausal weight gain, it's a number of these different factors. So you can look at the menopause research or literature and see, okay, so changing hormones seem to have an effect on, fat redistribution, or even, maybe some increase. But we also see that changing hormones affect centers in our brain that affect appetite. And so we kind of have a higher or more urge to eat. It affects sleep-wake cycles, as many of us know. Certainly affects temperature regulation. And so it also can affect fat oxidation. So our body just doesn't want to burn fat as readily. And so that's just hormones, right? And then there's sarcopenia, which is a technical term for this natural loss of lean tissue that happens as we age. And as we know, lean tissue is really our most metabolically active tissue. Well, this occurs in both men and women. It's a part of aging. And so that's where activity comes in, right? So the more active we stay, even with unintentional activity, we can slow that decline, which can be really important, so we don't have to just keep eating less and less, basically, to maintain weight. Another factor are lifestyle changes. Just all these things that we're doing, kids leaving the house, potentially for some people, taking care of aging parents. Some people have kids moving back into their house. There's career changes. We've just gone through all of that. Career changes, a move from Minnesota to Georgia, a lot of lifestyle changes that just really kind of disrupt habits and patterns and changes. And then there's this final part of the perfect storm that, again, is just a whole nother body of literature and research, which is the effect of diets and going on and off diets, and consequently, or some people call it yo-yo dieting, but weight cycling. So you gain a bunch of weight, and then you lose weight. You gain weight and you lose weight. And that actually has an effect on all of those different things, your appetite centers, certain hormone regulation stays down, a hormone called leptin, that after a period of weight loss, your body kind of will start to send you messages to be hungrier. And so even if you've restored the weight, so it's all of that together. And so when I see someone come in and they've gained what they will say feels like a lot more weight than, say, that 5-pound lifestyle kind of change, I start to look at some of those other factors. And that's where we can do an intervention to, obviously change activity, make sure they're getting enough nutrients and protein for maintaining that lean tissue, obviously interrupting the diet cycling pattern and helping kind of refocus where we can put our efforts. And, and in terms of hormones, it's really looking at, as we lose estrogen or as that fluctuates and then declines, we need to be concerned about our bone health and our cardiovascular health and the risk of cancer and some of those things. So I like to help people focus on food and eating for improving your health versus the fixation on looking a certain way.
Right. To go back to the yo-yo dieting, I know that you talk about the fact that can actually cause you to gain weight when you start trying to diet again. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that we, in more recent years, have better research and literature to understand that. I know that we have studies that go back as far as, well, it seems like it's a long way away, but it's still in science, actually relatively recent, like back to the 1980s, where they were doing, animal studies on some of this. But what we see most people will anecdotally report this, right? you want to lose weight, you're in your 20s or 30s, and so you do a diet and you lose weight like really fast or easily even, it seems. And then something happens and you don't stay on that diet. And then over time, you start to regain that weight and probably even a little bit more. And so there's some research that will show us that our body's way of adapting to that famine that occurred, it didn't know that you had well-meaning intentions to lose weight. Your body's like, ooh, we were starving and we were in a famine, and now we have a good food supply. And so your body's fat stores can potentially overshoot where they would have been. And so oftentimes, if you give it enough time, the body will stabilize back out to where your genetic, set point might be in that particular range. But then the person does that again. And I really refer to this as almost like an injury to the body. So it happens again and you lose weight, but it's a little bit harder and it takes a little bit longer. So you do probably a more restrictive, more rules, tighter control on a diet. And then you lose some weight, feel really good about it, get a lot of attention for that, feel accomplished. But then something happens, right? Stress happens, you do a move, and you gain the weight back, but it comes back faster. And the other thing that we will note from that literature is when it comes back, it actually preferentially gets stored in the belly area, coincidentally, as visceral fat, because it's a protective mechanism by the body. So again, over time, if a person keeps doing this, it can just become where the body's very resistant to losing weight, and it's a protective mechanism by the body. So those metabolic adaptations that we might refer to them are something that I always say, like, if someone's going to prescribe you a diet, think of it like any other prescription. Know what the benefits are, but know what the risks are too, or the potential side effects of that diet, because really the best diet is the one you can stick with if you consider, that literature.
Absolutely. And that described me like my whole life. I think my first diet, I was 15 when I went on my first diet. And that's like been my whole life, is up and down. And I think, Colleen, back me up. And if I say I'm going to go on a diet, stop me. But I have vowed to not go on another diet again.
You have now said it on tape. So
I've said it. It's out there. Yeah.
I'm like, for you, Bridget.
I know. I was like, I'm not doing it I actually really like to exercise. I love just the different activities. And we'll talk more too about how the pandemic has interrupted some of that. And, things like that. But I just said, I'm not doing it. And there is so much pressure from the outside world. And you mentioned that too in your article. I don't know any advice on that for the pressures from the outside world about how we look and everything.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I would just love to have a whole big group of people and everybody talk about the pressures that they experience, because I think it's probably really individual and it's based on so much of your own personal relationship with food and the messages you had probably really early on. So, you could have had messages at home growing up, and maybe, we see this even with eating disorders. So sometimes something in culture at a time when an individual, say, is going through puberty and they're kind of not sure who they are and they feel wonky and they're questioning their identity, food can become a sense of control. And then we have, a diet culture. We have an anti-aging culture. It doesn't take much to see that, unless you turn off all media and all social media and unfollow a bunch of stuff, sometimes that can be helpful. But it's being aware of the marketing that's out there and that we don't have to put up with that. But then layer upon that is, say, the 55-year-old who used to be a dancer or a cheerleader or a gymnast, who had messages from coaches that, you're really, really good and you're an okay person when you're this body size. And so here you are, you don't know who you are anymore. Kids have left, there's a lot of stuff going on. And then it's trying to redefine, like, well, okay, if I can control my numbers and the number of steps and the calories I count and I lose weight, then I'll know who I am. And so again, that's so individualized. I could tell you a different story for every single person that I talk to. And I think that's really where, as you mentioned, Bridget, in my article, I talk a lot and encourage clinicians to be very compassionate and supportive and hold that part of where someone's really concerned about their body weight. And so I'm not going to say you can't lose weight or you shouldn't lose weight, but just really holding that space of, wow, that's so important to you. And what makes it hard to just focus on health. And that can be a really long conversation. So in some ways, I kind of am on a little bit of a gray area in terms of being a nutrition therapist, but in many cases, I will pass the baton or recommend that person see a therapist if it's really kind of becoming too much. And it's not just a nutrition, / body image identity thing. It's bigger and more. It's never been resolved. That's when I start to partner with other clinicians too.
Okay.
When you have, a woman over 45 who is perimenopausal or 50 and has gone through the change, her estrogen levels are now decreasing. And you speak about the fact that the estrogen, as it decreases, you can actually increase your appetite. I believe, what was it called? Aphasia or something to that effect?
Hyperphagia. It's a really funky technical term.
Where you actually, because some women are like, I don't understand why I'm hungrier. Like, why am I desiring to eat more? But that's actually not 100%, but there is a factor of your estrogen is dropping and it's causing you to be hungrier. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and in perimenopause, that can even be probably more complicated than I'm even stating, right? Because it's not just estrogen, but it could even be the fluctuations of the hormones. So if you look at like scientists, when they study individual women, the hormones aren't just declining like this. It's this rapid up and down kind of thing, right? So it's declining overall, but it is a dynamic fluctuation. And part of that is progesterone too. And so progesterone is a hormone, if you think about it, for a normal reproductive woman who's not on birth control or oral contraceptives, after ovulation is when that's the time when progesterone increases. And sometimes women will even say, oh my gosh, I have lots of cravings and I'm really hungry during that time. And, I always think of progesterone as the pregnancy hormone. And so it makes sense because your body's potentially preparing for a pregnancy. So when we're going through these fluctuations, and progesterone might be spiking, but estrogen's not counteracting it, or estrogen spiking and progesterone. So there's all these other factors that come into play. As a result, it kind of wreaks havoc in terms of turning on or off those body functions in the brain as we're thinking about appetite. So I know that kind of gets kind of technical, but what you can do about it then is just to slow down and pay attention to that. So if you skip breakfast, skimp on lunch, and are having tons of cravings in the afternoon and evening, well, is that because of hormones? Or is it because your body's really hungry? But it might magnify or intensify that. So you might have been able to get by with that eating pattern in the past, but now your body just really needs to have more of a regular, consistent intake to help manage that a little bit more.
Okay. And what about the food that we are eating as we age? It's not necessarily just perimenopause and menopause, but as we age, our body changes, our metabolism changes. What food should we be putting in our body to help maintain the strength and the bone density and just overall health?
Yeah, that's exactly where I try to help people. Well, when I meet with somebody, that's one of my first things that I do is I do a complete nutrition assessment. And I first, kind of put a magnifying glass to what someone tells me they're already eating so that I can use that to help people see, like, let's focus on, like say for the individual who's not having breakfast, let's try to have something simple at breakfast. And let's say it's someone who likes yogurt and can tolerate, dairy products. And so that's a super easy breakfast, right? So you can have yogurt and we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. So we're getting some good protein. It has calcium. some other, important nutrients. You could have some really good berries with that. And again, you're getting those good fiber, nutrient-rich foods, and probably even like some walnuts. You're going to get some omega-3 fats. So I like to help people understand what those nutrients are, or those body systems that we want to take care of. So bone health, calcium and vitamin D, and some other minor nutrients become important. So like vitamin D, often we can do like a blood test to find out where your vitamin D is at. And in some cases, supplement if someone isn't outside very often. Calcium, there's a lot of really good calcium-rich foods in dairy products, but there's also good calcium sources in plant foods and non-dairy foods like oranges and almonds and some are sesame seeds. So there's kind of all the collard greens. I live here in Georgia, and I love collard greens, but they're like a really rich, excellent source of calcium. So helping people identify what are those foods you already like, and then what are some of these nutrients that we might be deficient in, and then let's plug those in. So that's kind of the big thing for bone health, but also gut health becomes another big concern for perimenopausal and menopausal women. So as we have some of those hormones shifting and potentially related to some other things, people will say that they have a lot more constipation and bloating and diarrhea, or back and forth, or one or the other. And so the type of foods that we eat, fiber-rich type foods, which mostly are plant foods, can help create a healthy gut microbiome, which might help with some of those potential problems. Others are, your cardiovascular health concerns. So in that area, we focus on omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in fish oil or fatty fish like salmon, tuna, or plant sources like walnuts and ground flaxseed and chia seed and some other things like that.
And you talked a little bit in your article, and I was trying to find where it was. It was talking about like, are there any foods that can really help the hormones? Any foods that you eat that will help your hormones? And could you talk a little bit about what your findings were with that?
I'm not really sure where you're thinking about that.
Maybe I'm trying to look at the article here and see where I wrote that. I have it all underlined.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I can speak to that.
Well, are you talking about phytoestrogen rich foods?
Maybe, or I can't remember if that was exactly what was in there, but you were.
Oh, yes, that was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, so that comes up in the area of supplements, where, how can we have like a non-pharmacological way to help women? And so phytoestrogens are chemicals or components that are found in plants, and they're widely available in, one is like red clover. We don't really eat red clover, so that gets packaged up in a little pill. And then the other is soy foods. And what those two have in common is they have a component of phytoestrogen. They're called isoflavones. And isoflavones are just these little chemicals that when you eat soy foods, for example, they get into the gut, into your GI tract, and you need a certain type of intestinal bacteria that will potentially convert those isoflavones into what might be an active form of a estrogenic property in the body. The thing is that when you look at studies, a lot of studies will show that it doesn't seem to make a difference, whereas other women seem to have a benefit. And so what they've concluded is that there's probably about a third of North American women that may have this type of intestinal bacteria that can help with that conversion. So theoretically, if you could eat soy foods, have that transition or that conversion happen, then it might turn on or turn off certain body functions so that we're not having hot flashes and we're not struggling with so many night sweats. And so it can have a potential benefit. But again, they're rigorously looking at this research, and there's good studies that say, yeah, we can't really count on that. But we do know that soy foods are a really good antioxidant, anti-inflammatory food. It's a high quality soy protein. My master's research was in soy, so I've followed soy for a really long time, which that poor food has just been through the ringer in terms of press. But the reality is that it's one of those that, had one bad research article come out, which has actually been retracted. And then the idea that this is something that, increases or promotes breast cancer, does all these horrible things to the body is kind of persisted. And so it's, still kind of a debatable topic, but is that what you were referring to?
I think, it was. And we're getting a few questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Val, what's your opinion? Teresa asked, what's your opinion on probiotics?
Oh, you want to know my opinion? I thought.
Yes. No, Teresa wants to know your opinion on probiotics.
I was like, what? That's another great question. It depends. So, what I usually want to know is what are we trying to have happen as a result of the probiotic intervention? So, is someone struggling with constipation, or is it diarrhea? Do we know if it's from IBS or from another particular history of antibiotics? So we have to be careful with probiotics. We have to make sure that what we're prescribing actually targets what that particular outcome is that we want to resolve or the problem, because just not any old, and you can get these probiotics that have billions of species, and people think that, that will cover it, and not always. They still need a specific strain and type of bacteria to really target. At least that's what the research would say. We also need to have some caution around probiotics, though, because in some cases they might not be helpful, and it could actually contribute to more problems for some people. So it's really an individual basis, but certainly I help people and guide people to what they might try and see if that helps, and if it doesn't, then we move on.
Can you ask a doctor or even a pharmacist, in saying I have diarrhea or I have constipation or I have bloating, which one would you recommend for that particular issue?
Well, my hope is that you could. For many individuals, clinicians, it depends on their scope of practice, right? So, are they paying attention to the literature about probiotics, for example? At the North American Menopause Society annual conference, which was in Chicago last fall, they had a couple really notable presenters that talked about probiotics for gut health and probiotics for vaginal health. And very, very, leading scholars in terms of the work that they do. And, this is a room of 700 gynecologists and clinicians. And one of the questions that someone from the audience asked the presenters is, do either of you use probiotics? And both of them said no. So that was pretty telling.
Wow. Okay.
And the individual who focuses on the gut health part of it, his recommendation, as we all kind of know, is that there's so much we still don't understand about probiotics. But what we do know is a plant-based diet that is high in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and those kinds of foods actually populate healthy gut bacteria for people. For normal, there's certain things that will interrupt that, and that's where we kind of have to look at it differently. But for most people, just having a healthy, well-balanced diet is probably, where more beneficial.
Okay. Yeah, we have another question.
Do you want to ask Kim's question?
Sure. Kim asks, are there certain foods that lead to a thicker middle or a gain in that area, i.e. carbs? So, yeah.
Pesky carbohydrate.
Yeah.
They could, just as overeating any food could. So when you think about it from the standpoint that potentially the gain in the middle is related to overeating in general, and that might be, for every individual, that might be a little bit different. How do we determine what overeating is? Because I have a lot of women who come to me and they're like, I'm eating 1,200 calories a day. I exercise all the time and I still have 5 pounds in this middle. So that's a tricky question. But carbohydrates are very typically highly palatable foods that are often really efficient fuel sources for the body. So crackers, breads, some of those kinds of foods, if they're, potentially overconsumed, they could have an effect for some people that might be something that's contributing to that middle. But I know plenty of people that eat, a good amount of carbohydrates that don't have weight gain either. So it's kind of the whole thing. Most of us, probably anyone who's around our age who's watching, we started in this whole diet culture with fat was the evil enemy, right? So if we just didn't eat fat, we would lose weight. And many of us did that very well. All of us perfectionists got it down. And then, of course, we come back with fat's okay. And we know that eating fat doesn't make you fat. And so I always caution people to blame a particular macronutrient, but no matter what the macronutrient, protein, fat, or carbohydrates, really focus on those nutrient dense sources.
I think Colleen must have gotten lost for a second. I think that
she kind of froze up there too.
Yeah, she did. I think that her sometimes her internet, she has different ones, but it must have gone off. But when you say that, I've read your article, and when Kim asked that question, I think about what I've been doing, and this pandemic is just like, it's like had me all around. Like, I don't go to the classes anymore that I would go to, my exercise classes that I love. And I started out great. Like, I'm going to do this. Hey girl, she's back.
I'm back.
You're back. I thought you probably just got knocked off. I was just talking about.
I did.
Yeah. The whole pandemic and how it's just wreaked havoc. Started out doing great. Then it's like, I just went into this like, slump, like I'm just mad at everything. And then things kind of started to open up, and I went back to classes, started to feel great. And now numbers are spiking, and I'm like, I'm not going back to my classes because COVID numbers are spiking. And I do notice it's so bizarre that like, I'll like, I don't know if it's mental or what, like, oh my gosh, I feel pudgy. My tummy feels all like jelly. Then when I'm at my classes, I'm like, I feel tight, I feel good. I don't know if that's in my head or if that's really happening or what's going on there.
And I there's so many parts to that. And having that insight and that perspective of what's changed, and then being really compassionate and calm with yourself about that. Yeah. So recognizing, okay, I am kind of struggling, maybe not. We do know that there's a relationship that when people are taking care of their body, they're eating well, they're doing their normal physical activity, no matter what's happening with weight, they feel better. And then when you start to feel better, you do more, right? You do better with your activity. And so there's definitely this kind of relationship between exercise, nutrition, and body image. And that's why I do address it with some individuals. And so what can happen though, is we get that like, okay, I feel really pudgy. And then that can kind of start a downward spiral in terms of feeling stressed or moody. And then what do we do when we feel stressed or moody? Back to Kim's question, probably go grab the carbohydrate snacks.
The easy
and probably
snacks.
Not fruit and vegetables. Like our brain, I think, get really excited over that, but it gets really excited over chips, salsa, and and I think just being aware, like, okay, so here's what's going on, setting some intentions or goals around what can I do right now, and being, just even if it's just this 1 year that we're disrupted, we can always get back on track. I just saw. Where was it? A woman who, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember the details, but it was about a woman who I think was an Ironman triathlete in her 80s. And she started when she was 59. And so it's never too late. It's never too late to take a break sometimes and then come back into your activity and, maybe a healthier eating plan or whatever that might mean for an individual. But yeah, I totally
Yeah.
Last night I'm sitting there with my little veggie straws, which I don't even really like them.
I know you're trying to get that thing that is going to fulfill a craving or something. And I always, on one diet that I was on, I do remember the one thing the person who was leading it said was, if you're having a craving for something, then you should have that thing, because if you're trying to fulfill it with these other things, it's probably not going to fulfill it. But it's not like not to constantly crave something. Like,
right.
Yeah.
That's so important to think about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens. Like sometimes when people have a rule or a forbidden food, or even set up this idea that this is bad for me, I shouldn't eat these carbohydrates. And then you add that to, and I'm craving chocolate, or I'm craving a particular snack or carbohydrate containing food. It can kind of backfire from that standpoint, but also to legitimize that cravings are really normal. It's okay that we have a craving. It's great that we crave food. If we didn't crave food or desire food, we would perish as a human race, right? So, the reward centers in our brain are set up in a way that we do have a desire to go get food. The reality is we live in a culture where we have a lot of highly palatable food around us quite frequently. And efficient fuel sources, that by that I mean higher sugar, more processed foods, actually even get our brain even more excited. And so it's just having an awareness of that and trying to balance that. And so if you are, let's say, having a craving for one of those really delicious carb-laden goodies, I usually recommend that people practice mindful eating. And so then there's a whole concept around mindfulness and mindful eating where, you can just remove distractions when you're eating, approach the food without judgment, eat really slowly and mindfully, savoring and allowing yourself to taste the food. So often that will be something I will do in session with individuals, is say, why don't you go get that food that you think you shouldn't have, and let's just have it together. And let's see if you even like it. Sometimes people will say, like I said, about the veggie straws. My daughter got me started on those. And they're just crunchy and they have like this really great texture. So they definitely solve a need for when I want to crunch on something. And if you can have some awareness of that, knowing that it's not really going to ever probably completely satisfy maybe what you need if you're frustrated or eating for some type of a emotional reason, then you can have a better intervention.
That's cool.
Before I freeze again, I'm going to get a question out. We talked before off air about intermittent fasting, and it's a very popular thing to do right now. But you had mentioned it can also be a very dangerous thing to do. It's not the best idea. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So intermittent fasting, as well as any other diet, is in and of itself, diet mentality is problematic because it already increases stress and anxiety, that you have to follow these set of rules. There can be some benefits of it having some comfort of, if we use intermittent fasting as an example, okay, well, if I just don't eat, during these hours of the day, I'll be okay. And there's so many different intermittent fasting protocols out there, though, too. So even when we're addressing intermittent fasting, I always have to kind of look at which one are we talking about? Because there's like 5-2, where you don't eat every other day, and alternate day fasting. When you look at the science and literature, it's actually really interesting. And so they'll refer to it as time-restricted feeding. And so when we look at time-restricted feeding and the effect metabolically on the body, there actually can be some benefits. But a lot of those are still an 8 to 10 hour window of eating, which is pretty normal. So if you eat 3 meals about every 3 hours, and they're 3 square meals that have some protein, carbohydrates, variety of fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, then that can fit into, I guess, that paradigm if someone's wanting some guidance around that. But intermittent fasting in and of itself is, becomes a diet rule, becomes something that a lot of times people don't stick to. And then we're back to the conversation we had before of where, okay, that helped. You lost 10 or 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds. And now what are you going to do and that was my problem with alternate day fasting, is I just can't even see how that's applicable for someone in midlife when on certain days you're only supposed to eat so many calories, which means it's harder to exercise. Mm-hmm. And then my question was, well, my daughter's getting married. So what if my alternate day that I'm not supposed to eat is the day that she's getting married? Like, do I not have cake? Like, what do I do in that scenario? And what we know from an eating disorder standpoint is when people fall off the wagon, they fall big. Mm-hmm. And so when you don't maintain your rules, it kind of all falls apart. And so I just really want people to think about, when they're thinking about a diet or evaluating that, one, is it something you can stick with for the rest of your life? And two, will it potentially cause micronutrient or malnutrition? So are we taking out food groups? One of the problems with intermittent fasting is if you're not eating at certain times of the day, you might get lightheaded, you might be dizzy, it might impact your activity if you are an avid exerciser or workout. And so it can affect energy. We know energy deficits are problems for midlife and menopausal women. So that's kind of, again, I try to help people do a little bit of a pros and cons analysis and, is it really worth it in the long run?
Mm-hmm. That's so great. And one more thing I wanted that you, in your article, that also hit home with me was the increased alcohol consumption with age. And I was like, oh, that's another one. Like, I do drink more and I didn't realize it. Like, I don't work outside of the home anymore. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have to worry about what, if I'm hungover, which I don't drink that much to be hungover, but I notice now I'm probably having a glass of wine every night rather. I used to save that for the weekend or something. So I didn't know, any advice on that for the midlife woman.
Yeah. Oh, that's always a tough one.
It's a tough one. I know.
I definitely enjoy a really good glass of wine or two.
Yeah.
And I even like beer and and that's just my own thing. But so it's so individual. And from a health perspective, I mean, the American Cancer Society and leading organizations that do research, alcohol intake and prevalence among midlife women is increasing quite significantly. Mm-hmm. And so we have to kind of take a look at that. Like, why is that happening? And what does that then mean for a particular individual? And so oftentimes what I see with individuals is they might have a safe range in terms of intake, but it is different. Mm-hmm. So maybe they, had an alcoholic beverage occasionally, and now it's every single night. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the data, we could say, well, one glass of wine a day isn't necessarily problematic, but for that individual, it could be. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, I know that the recommendations have recently changed, I think from the American Cancer Society, where they're saying basically no alcohol, whereas we've used to kind of have that, one drink, which is 6 ounces of wine or a 12-ounce beer for a woman and 2 drinks for a man. And I think they're revisiting that from a health perspective. Mm-hmm. But I see literature back and forth on that. So I try to, again, work with individuals where they're at. What are their concerns related to alcohol consumption? And just to remember that alcohol is a depressant. So if you're struggling with mood and signs of, maybe subclinical depression, that might be another reason to be a little more careful with a substance like that isn't going to probably help you feel better. The other effect is that, again, thinking about changing and shifting hormones and, does it potentially have a different and more negative effect on liver enzymes and liver metabolism than it did when we were younger. And so that could potentially increase your risk of certain liver problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely something not to ignore and to
Mm-hmm.
evaluate and check out for an individual. But I probably have a, again, much more motivational interviewing kind of approach around that with individuals to see where are you at, what's important to you, what are your health goals, and then let's look at that together.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we also hear a lot from our listeners is exercise. They'll often say, I'm doing the same thing I was doing before, but it's no longer working.
Mm-hmm.
I know that as we get a little bit older, our muscle mass is just as important, because as our hormones go down, osteoporosis becomes an issue. But what can you say to them when they say to you, I'm doing what I was doing before, but it's just not working anymore?
You need to do something different.
Okay.
So there's two answers to that, though. But from the standpoint of weight management, for pretty much anybody, though, that would be true. But if you've kind of been running the 3 miles or your 1 hour of activity every single day forever and ever and ever, probably need to mix it up. But if that's what you enjoy and love doing, then it has all kinds of cardiometabolic benefits. So if trying to go do something that you don't enjoy means you're probably going to stop exercising, that's not a good idea. Mm-hmm. More often, what I see with individuals is we have this loss of lean tissue that's happening. And a lot of women are doing moderate intensity cardiovascular type activities that they enjoy and are fun, whether that's walking or cycling or some of those kinds of things. And they're not bringing in more of the weight-bearing resistance exercise. And it's really crucial. And so that's more than just lifting soup cans, but that's an opportunity to find a group of women and get together and hire a personal trainer, or get some guidance around, get some resistance bands, or do some of those types of exercises. Not only are they beneficial in terms of maintaining that lean tissue, which is really important, but also for bone health. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the most important parts of that. And then the other thing is making sure that you do something that you enjoy. And so if you play tennis and you love to play tennis, well, absolutely keep playing tennis. Mm-hmm. And your body's just adapted to that. Mm-hmm. To your body, it's really not, you're not going to see definite gains once you do the same activity over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is there something you were saying that weight-bearing exercises are important to add, and also cardiovascular? Mm-hmm. So how often should we be raising the heart rate? How many times a week? Or is it, there really isn't a formula? Is there one thing that, because I know you had talked about some research where there was extreme exercising versus moderate exercising.
Yeah. So, there's a third component to that too, though, for aging, which is flexibility. And so that's kind of where, if someone really enjoys yoga, it has a really important benefit as well. I mean, some yoga classes or positions certainly are strength moves, but flexibility is really important to help with balance as we get older too. So to prevent falls, and depends on the age of your listeners or the people watching, but the fracture rate for individuals after age 80 is really high. And so we know that one of the first ways to prevent falls and fractures, if we are experiencing some osteopenia or decreased bone density, is to maintain that structure and the ability to be flexible and balance well. And then, I'm sorry, Colleen, what did you say again? What was the
I was talking about mixing the cardio. How much is good for midlife women? What would you suggest?
Yeah. So in general, for overall health, the American College of Sports Medicine would recommend a minimum of 150 minutes a week of, kind of moderate to high, moderate intensity activity. The research would say around 250 minutes a week would potentially help with weight loss, right? But again, fitness and physical activity studies are quite interesting because we never really get the results we always look for. So one of the studies I mentioned in the article both of you are referring to was super interesting to me because it was funded by the American Cancer Society because they wanted to understand how much exercise do midlife or postmenopausal women need to do to reduce visceral body fat, because we know that will, improve the rates of, preventing cancer. And so they took, I don't have the information right in front of me, but I believe it was a group of about 400 women. It was a large study, broke them into two groups. And one group did 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And the other group did 60 minutes, 5 days a week. So that's 300 minutes of activity versus, I believe it was, are you looking at it, Bridget?
I was trying to find it. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, the point of it is that on average, and they did this for a year, and these were women who were not active before. So with most exercise studies, they will definitely use people who haven't had a regular routine of exercising, to what we just talked about before, because your body's adapted to that. So these were individuals who were largely sedentary, not doing a lot of activity, did this 1 year intervention. At the end of 1 year, on average, they lost 5 pounds. And there wasn't really, the researchers in the conclusion, so if you only read the abstract, the conclusion would say that certainly the higher amount, the larger amount of activity resulted in, more weight loss, but it was, or actually fat loss, since that's what they were focused on, but it was like 2 to 3 pound difference. So it wasn't significant. Right. It was statistically significant according to the study. But when I went in to read more about the study and what they did, my first thought was, well, first of all, if I'm working with a woman who hasn't exercised and she's doing 300 minutes a week of activity, and we're 3 months into this and she's lost a couple pounds, she's going to quit.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not going to stay with it. And so that's where high intensity interval type activities, kind of those 10 to 15 minute, even 20-minute really good fitness routines, high intensity workouts, actually have been shown to also result in some type of weight loss. And people can usually maintain those a little bit more, do it more consistently. And again, just like the diet, you want something that you're going to keep doing. And so, yes, we might have things like a quarantine or a pandemic. Hopefully we'll get through this and it's not going to happen again for another 100 years or whatever. But for most cases, you can get back to that activity that you were doing before. So I usually I look at where people are at, like what you're doing right now, and then build from there. So if you're already someone who's, gets up in the morning and does your hour run and, want to do more, like how can we add in some other kinds of resistance type activities? The other thing to evaluate for some of those people is we talk about the sedentary athlete syndrome. So these are these people that work out 60 minutes every single day, but then they sit for 23 hours. And so you have to evaluate your unintentional movement.
That's
neat. Evaluate that unintentional activity. And so if you've had a career change where maybe you were bopping around, I had a nurse I worked with one time, and she was, always on her feet, moving around. And then she got promoted to a manager position, and she was more sedentary at her office. And it was when we talked together that she realized, wow, this 10-pound weight gain that I've experienced over the past year or so coincided with this job change. And she had said, I haven't changed anything. I'm eating the same. I don't overeat. I exercise all the time. But this was this little change that was, so we often underestimate that unintentional movement. And so it's really important to keep that in mind.
If you had a woman who walked in your office and she was really frustrated because she felt like she was just gaining weight, everything she's done hasn't worked that worked before, what's the first thing you could recommend her? Is it getting rid of something in her diet? Is it sitting down and writing what you eat, like a small, simple step for women who are just so frustrated with weight gain in midlife that they can take to kind of make them feel like they're getting a little control or doing something different?
That is such a great question. That would be my $1 million question.
Right. And that is our $1 million question.
I will say that my first thing that comes to mind is to really just honor and acknowledge how frustrated the woman is, that she feels heard first and foremost, because there's often that idea that I have this magic food or this, silver bullet kind of thing that we can do that's going to stop this out of control feeling. So that would be one of the first things, is just that people feel validated and heard that this is really a struggle. And then together, taking a look at all of the different lifestyle pieces. So like I have this worksheet that I put together, which is called a Healthy Habits Worksheet. And we look at all of these different parts of, let's look at this together. So maybe someone is going to their doctor regularly. They're having their mammograms. They're having their regular colonoscopy. They're doing all those things. It's like, well, let's make sure and check that off. Like, yay, you're doing that. And then maybe they're working out all the time and they are doing really good cardiovascular flexibility and strength work. Yay, that's great. You're happy with that. But maybe their problem is that they are really, really hungry in the middle of the day. And they, are trying to eat healthier, but they don't recognize that they're usually under eating in the morning. And so that might be journaling. That might be the first, kind of detective work that I have that person do, is we have to figure out what is causing the weight gain. So all of those different things in the perfect storm, really looking at that, doing an assessment, and then, going at what we actually can control. So really helping women figure out what you can control at a time when everything feels out of control.
Is sugar really an enemy as we get older? I mean, I know it's not the best thing in the world.
It's not my enemy.
Okay.
I think that, every individual, will probably give you a different opinion or thought. I probably be because I do come at my work from an eating disorder perspective, and my own personal relationship with food is very intuitive eating based. And I trust food. I don't worry about foods that I eat. And so then it keeps its proper place. Mm-hmm. So I enjoy sugar containing foods. If I'm going to have ice cream, it is going to be Haagen-Dazs. It is not going to be one of those enlightened whatever things I just don't even understand. And at the same time, the amount I have might be different than actually what I would have had 10 or 20 years ago. But that's actually listening to, that I can have it and that I'm not deprived. And so that's just a whole different mental perspective when you give yourself permission to have some of these foods and then work on the, what is a reasonable amount of sugar for you. Mm-hmm. And with all that said, though, I see it in my own household too, but some people really, really struggle with what feels like an addictive property. We kind of have debunked the idea that sugar or food is addictive, but there's something for some people that it really feels powerful. Like that sugar just, you can't have it out on the counter. Mm-hmm. And so I happen to be someone who, for whatever reason, I can have a bowl of M&Ms on the counter and I might walk by them a few times and never really dig in. But for other people, that could never happen. And so I'm pretty respectful of understanding that individual's relationship with food and really helping them navigate. So you can have permission to have maybe the sugar containing foods, but what does that really look like in your lifestyle and in your eating pattern so that it can stay in its proper place?
Mm-hmm. How can people get in touch with you, Val?
That's great. Well, you can go to my website, which is Enlighten You Nutrition, or www.enlighten, the word enlighten, ENLIGHTEN, the letter U, the word nutrition.com. And all of my contact information is on my website. I have information about a nutrition group that I've offered in person. I've done virtual before. I'm going to start a new virtual group again in September. And so if anyone wants to have more conversation and get in touch, that's a good way to do that too. There's a contact form on my website, so that's probably the best my email is valid@enlightenyounutrition.com, so you can certainly email me, but I welcome email requests and I can point you in different directions or help you myself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah.
It's been so helpful to get questions answered. And I mean, we really could talk about this issue forever. But
I love talking about it.
Yeah. But it's so helpful.
Come on anytime, because but maybe we'll come back on, because we never even got to talk about body images and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
So
I just want to thank both of you, because when you reached out to me and I discovered your podcast, I love it. I love the humor you have on your social media. I love the different topics you're bringing in. I think that's really fresh. And as a midlife woman, that's really, really helpful for me personally. So I think the humor is great and everything that you're doing. So
thank you.
Thank you
we
so much.
really appreciate that, because we're trying hard to change the narrative in this time of life.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I'm all about too. Like, women deserve to feel empowered and feel good about themselves at any size. That's sometimes hard for people to take in, but it's true.
Thank you so much. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. Great. And we will definitely have you back on, and I hope people get in touch with you. And if there are any further questions from anybody in the audience, just let us know and we'll put them in the emails. So
okay, great.
Thanks so much, Val.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.